Hello, my name is Jo Runjargic from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. I would like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people, the traditional custodians of the land where I am broadcasting from today, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and to acknowledge members of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community who may be watching this webinar. Today, you'll be hearing from Jason Atkinson and Chris Hinchcliffe, followed by an opportunity for Jason and Chris to answer some of your questions you put through to us via pollev.com/ANSCO8Feb. For those not familiar with PolleV, you can type the address into your search engine or type PolleV, open up the site, and then add ANSCO8Feb as the username. You can start putting through questions when you're ready. Today, we'll be giving you an overview of the ANZSCO Comprehensive Review, how you can participate via the Consultation Hub, where to find information on the website to support your submission through the various consultation rounds. After the presentation, we will open a question and answer panel to respond to some of your questions. Today's session is being recorded and will be available on the ABS website for future viewing. We may not get through all your questions, so we'll look to follow up and provide additional responses along with the recording. I'll now hand over to Jason to start with the background.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jo, and a warm welcome to everyone who's dialed in today. I'm really pleased that you've logged in to attend this webinar, and it's our hope that the information we can share with you today will really give you some insights into what we're doing around ANZSCO and how you can participate in that process. So what is ANZSCO and why are we doing a comprehensive review? Unless you've accidentally stumbled into the webinar, you're probably a little bit familiar with what ANZSCO is, but just in case, ANZSCO stands for the Australian and New Zealand Standard Classification of Occupations. So it's a skill-based classification that's used to describe all of the occupations that are in the Australian and New Zealand labour markets. For the ABS, it underpins all of our official occupation-based statistics. So if you're thinking census and labour force, and more broadly, any data producers, consumers looking at occupation-based data will often use ANZSCO as well. So it describes data for governments, industry and businesses to inform and shape many different policies and programs around educational pathways, skilled migration, training and education, and more broadly, workforce strategies that give all of us the skills, I guess, to get and to keep jobs. So it's really important and touching many areas of the community. Now, while ANZSCO has had some minor updates over the past period of time, it really reflects the labour market of 2001. So some quick math there suggests it's at least 20 years old for most parts of the classification. And that's why some of you are thinking, yep, it's out of date. It needs some work there. For many, we've become very familiar with some occupations like data scientists and data analysts. And until recently, you couldn't even see these reflected directly in the classification. So that's why the ABS has taken a response to do this comprehensive review and update so that we can better reflect, the current state of the labour market. And in so doing, we can better meet all of our stakeholders' needs as well. I would note that this will be an Australian update. So whilst we're engaging with Statistics New Zealand throughout this process and have done on recent minor updates, they won't be reflecting that and using that in their official statistics at this point in time. So the work we're going to do will result in a new version of the classification containing some pretty comprehensive updates to be released in December of 2024, and that will enable it to be picked up in the 2026 census. We'll also then reflect it progressively in our official labour statistics, and that includes the labour force time series. So we really should be able to see that visibility of those new and emerging occupations as well. And all of this work is, of course, funded through the federal government's budget, and that was an announcement made in the 22-23 federal budget. So what does this look like in practice? Well, as part of this review and update, we really want to hear from you, our stakeholders, around where you think there are changes that are required in the classification. It's quite a significant undertaking, obviously, to update a 20-year-old classification, and so we really want to hear from you. We've planned quite an extensive consultation process to take place over the course of the next 2 years. So to make this kind of work, we've taken the classification, we've taken the set of occupations, and we've broken those up into some industry-based groupings. We've called these things focus areas, and there's around 42 of those. So these are trying to take similar or related occupations, group them together for each review, and hopefully that makes it easier for stakeholders to be looking and considering the related set of occupations. Hopefully that means for some stakeholders as well, all the things they're interested in are contained within one round of consultation. But of course, it's not perfect. There's no hard and fast rules about how we break those things up. And so it might be that for some stakeholders, you're interested in occupations spread across a number of focus areas and consequently a number of those rounds of consultation. But we've done the best we can to try and make that as streamlined as possible for our stakeholders. So as you can hopefully see on the screen, we've planned 4 rounds of consultation. The first 3 rounds of consultation contain a number of those focus areas that I've talked about, and we'll be seeking feedback on the changes that you need to see in those occupations. We'll then work through following each of those first 3 rounds and working through, again, that might involve some more targeted consultation with stakeholders and follow-ups on those submissions to develop a set of changes that we want to make into the classification. We'll then present a bit of a draft of those changes that we're proposing to make at the end of each of those rounds of consultation. And you can see the planned dates for those first 3 rounds. Now, round 4 is a little bit different, and this is where we want to present back to our stakeholders for consultation the final set of proposed changes. And that's really a chance and an opportunity for stakeholders to look at all of the changes we're proposing in context. It's effectively, a draft version of the classification, and enables you to be able to comment on where any of those changes might cause some unanticipated but really significant impacts to the work that you do. Following that last round, that 4th round of consultation, we'll take any feedback you provided and make any last-minute changes before we release the classification version by December of 2024. You can see from the dates that each of those consultation rounds will be open for at least 12 weeks. So that hopefully provides ample opportunity for you to be able to prepare, consult with your own networks as well, and provide that submission. I would note that we do need to be reasonably tight on those times because there is a lot of work to get through, as you can understand. And so we do need to be holding fast to those closing dates. If you can't get a submission in by that closing date, we will still accept it, but we can't guarantee that we'll have time to kind of process and consider that as part of our development of proposed changes. I'd like to draw your attention now as well to a new page that we've recently created through the ABS website. There's a link there or an address there that you can head to, or if you jump into a browser and type in updating ANSCO, you should be able to find that. This is really our one-stop shop, I guess, for all things related to the ANSCO review that we're undertaking. And so through this page, you'll be able to find links to more information about the classification, about how it works, and some relevant information papers that are associated with the work that we're doing. We've also got a social media hub as well, and you can see a little snapshot up there on your screen as well. And this is where you can find relevant media information, such as our media releases when we post them. We've also got some resources there as well, including some infographics or fact sheets that you can share with your stakeholders and networks as well to get them as excited as we are about the work we're doing. We've also got links there to our, I think the young people are calling it social pipes these days, so our Facebook and Twitter feeds as well if you want to jump on and be informed about the work that we're doing. On the main page there, that's the snapshot on the left there, that's where we'll be putting all of our latest updates and information on that page there. That's highlighted by that teal box you can see. So any of the latest information will be popping up there and then informing you about what's coming up in the review work. At the moment, we've updated that to include a direct link to the Consultation Hub, which I'll talk about in just a moment, but it also has a link there to the 13 focus areas that we're looking at in this first round of consultation. And you can see a snapshot of that on the lower right of your screen there, where we've got the focus areas and the occupations contained within those. We'll continue to update that page as well through future rounds of our consultation process. So I mentioned the Consultation Hub, and this is one of the tools that the ABS is increasingly using to do some of its consultation and enable that participation from our stakeholders. For those that have participated in consultations before, either with ANZSCO or with other areas of the ABS, you may be familiar with it. It effectively provides a one-stop shop where you can have a bit of an overview of the consultation objective and purpose, and then there's an online survey where you can provide your input into that consultation. For ANZSCO, we've actually developed a submission guide, which you can access through that overview page, and that contains all the information you need to be able to provide your submission. So you can access and download that from that overview page. I'd highlight as well that within that submission guide, it includes a preview of the survey questions. So you can use that to kind of share and collaborate with your colleagues and stakeholder networks as well to help in preparing your submission. So I'm now going to throw to Chris, and he's going to walk us through a little bit more about the survey and the questions and talk a bit about how to help with your submissions. Thanks, Chris.
Great. Thank you, Jason, and thank you, Joe. The slide that you can see there has got a variety of extracts on it. The first one of those is how do you actually access the survey and the Consultation Hub. So the top left box in blue is describing to you how do you get it. You click on that link or go in through the Consultation Hub. Once you click on that, it will take you through a very formalised and a very structured process to guide you through a set of questions. It will also give you the facility to lodge or provide any extra material you'd like to provide. One of the things that it's going to ask you to do is it's going to ask you to map and describe which focus area your submission relates to. We've done that for two reasons. One is to try and make it easier for you because you can focus on the bits that you're interested in. The second bit around that is it's trying to help us deal with the workflow and mean we can turn the classification update around much faster. So behind the scenes, we've got individual teams working on individual focus areas. So that's helping us allocate your submission to the people who are actually going to do the work and are responsible for making that change. So that's this requirement here about the focus area. The right-hand portion on the slide is giving you a flavour for the sort of questions that we're asking you for when we're doing the structured components of it. I've got three examples that come from those boxes. The first one is we're asking you, what occupations are in ANZSCO that are not separately identified? So to give you some examples of what you might find in there, we have one occupation in there called aged and disability carer. So ANZSCO comprises 1,076 occupations at the moment. One of those is aged and disability carer. In the 2021 census, there were over 227,000, yes, 227,000 employed persons classified to that occupation. Some of the feedback we've already received is they're probably not the same. So grouping them together in one occupation is probably not very sensible. What we've gleaned so far, as we've gone and spoken to people that we've encountered, is suggesting there's a distinction between aged carers and disability carers. Another example that you might come up in there to illustrate the example of occupations that aren't separately identified is the example of a penetration tester, also known as an ethical data hacker. So when we did a review of ANZSCO in 2021, one of the things we saw in there was we had a category that was capturing information and communications technology professionals. We went and found there was already an industry-wide framework that talked about what sort of cyber skills and what sort of roles are out in the workforce. And one of those was this penetration tester as I said, also known as an ethical data hacker. So we picked that up and we broke that one occupation into many. So all of a sudden, this occupation called a penetration tester is now visible. And that was reflected in the 2021 census. Another example of the questions that we're trying to ask is, are there occupations in ANZSCO that shouldn't be there? So are there ones that you think are not significant? So some examples that sit there is a motion picture projectionist. There were less than 100 motion picture projectionists in the 2021 census. That number has declined quite substantially over the last 20 years. It's not to say ANZSCO and motion picture projectionists aren't valued. It's just to say whether we're standing them up and we should be grouping them together with other occupations that are similar. Another example is an occupation in ANZSCO for a bungee jump master. There were very few bungee jump masters in the 2021 census, and that's another one of these occupations that was probably in there for a reason, probably not significant for Australia, and we can putting our effort into splitting out and dividing other occupations like the aged and disability carer. A third example of what we're asking in there is that the last box on that slide is talking about, are there occupations currently in ANZSCO that you think are inadequately described? So examples of what people have communicated to us as some of the issues or the inadequate descriptions in ANZSCO are things like skill levels. The skill level, as we've reflected in ANZSCO, doesn't reflect the 2023 labour market. So all occupations in ANZSCO are assigned to one of 5 skill levels that are based on the Australian Qualifications Framework. Where the requirements to undertake a particular occupation have changed over the last 20 years, if we haven't picked that up in ANZSCO, we're asking for your feedback to help us identify that and make those changes. Another area where occupations are inadequately described is all the occupations don't have a description of the tasks that are required to undertake that occupation. So to give you an example, we have pharmacists is one of our groups of occupations in ANZSCO at the moment, and it divides into 3. A retail pharmacist, a hospital pharmacist, and an industrial pharmacist. In the discussion we've had, one of the things that almost anyone that deals with pharmacists has come back and said, yeah, fine. They were called retail pharmacists 20 years ago. We don't use that term anymore. They're called community pharmacists. Another one that comes up is when we start thinking about the vocabulary that we use to describe people employed in the childcare industry. So one of our occupations is a childcare worker. The common phrase that almost keeps coming up to describe those occupations is childcare educators or early childhood educators. So trying to get that terminology and describe the tasks that people do is one of the things we're going to do. Again, we need your input to do that because we're certainly not experts on all 1,076 occupations in ANZSCO. Another question that someone's going to ask, and a very good one, is what happens when I give a submission? How do you assess it? So some of there's details in that submission guide, but some of the things that we've got that we're looking for, I've got 3. One of them is trying to provide a link to the substance of the submission and why it's relevant to policy, industry, or business. What's the underlying requirement behind the submission? We as statisticians can go and rearrange things and make them all pretty, but it's got to actually help for policy, industry, or business requirements. So we're after that information. We find that information really helpful when we think about how we're going to put our effort into breaking things up and how we're going to rearrange ANZSCO. A second item that we find really helpful is where people can give us some data that describes its contemporary significance and indeed what we think is going to happen into the future. So our historical process has been to go and look at the previous census. So we're looking at the 2021 census to see what's significant in that census. We're trying to be forward-looking and think about what the changes are likely to happen over the next 5 or 10 years. That's obviously not going to come from a 2021 census. We're certainly looking at other data sets like contemporary job ads. Any extra information that's occupation specific or related to a focus area, we would love to hear that. That's another thing we're looking for in submissions. Third thing we're looking for is the details that describe to us what makes that occupation. So things like skill level, tasks, the policy rationale, contemporary labels, all the things I was talking about before. Those details, we're interested in hearing about those because that's what we're trying to reflect in ANZSCO. Now, with that said, it's also got to be balanced against the fact that ANZSCO is a statistical classification. So because it's a statistical classification, there are some rules and some parameters that it has to operate within. The rest of that slide is trying to give you a picture of what they are. So the first one is to say it's exhaustive. So you can see my picture of the jogger there. She is exhausted. Hopefully that's a visual cue to remember that word. When I say something is exhaustive, means that all of ANZSCO's occupations must describe all occupations in the labour market. You can't come up with an occupation and it doesn't fit in any one of the occupations. So it must be exhaustive. You can't have any gaps and you can't have any overlaps. Second rule that's on the slide is around being exclusive. That means each occupation, any job that you care about, can go to only one occupation. You can't come up with an occupation and go, oh, it might go in this one or it might go in that one. It has to go into one and only one occupation. And the third thing that we're looking about here is ANZSCO is not just a list. ANZSCO is a classification. So that's how we've grouped occupations together. And the criteria we use to group occupations together is this thing we've called skill. As I alluded to before, when we think about skill, that's a function of where the requirements to undertake the occupation map to the Australian Qualifications Framework, experience required to undertake the occupation, and the set of tasks that the occupation undertakes. So I'm not expecting you to be an expert on all of those criteria. That's our job as a statistical agency, but I hope that's giving you some flavour of the lens that we're running when we're getting these submissions and to try and put it into the statistical classification, because it's not just a case of updating a list. So to give you an example of what some of these statistical classification criteria look like, I want to talk to you about 3 occupations that are currently in ANZSCO at the moment. The first one of those is the Chief Executive Officer. And so the picture you've got there is the Chief Executive Officer has typically got a bird's eye view of what's going on in his or her organisation. The second occupation is the motion picture projectionist. It's the second picture. And the third is the trolley collector. They're 3 of the 1,076 occupations currently within ANZSCO. So when I said ANZSCO is exhaustive, any job that you dream up must go to one of those 1,076 occupations. We can't just simply make motion picture projections disappear. They have to be there for ANZSCO to be exhaustive. What we will do if we were to remove, if we were to take out the identifier for motion picture projectionist, is we would aggregate that occupation with another occupation and turn 2 occupations into one. So it's a question of aggregation rather than deletion. The second criteria is thinking about exclusiveness. A motion picture projectionist is going to be somebody that operates film projection equipment. That's how we've defined them. They can't be classified as a Chief Executive Officer or a trolley collector. The reason they're different is because of the skill level and what they do. That's why we're interested in the tasks and the skill level. It's one of the things we're using to distinguish between occupations. And the last thing I said was around being structured. These 3 occupations are in completely different parts of the occupation classification. They are not grouped together. And I suggest intuitively that makes sense. A chief executive officer is doing something very different to a motion picture projectionist, is doing something very different to a trolley collector. The criteria we've used is skill to separate them out. If you actually go and look in the classification, you'll find the trolley collector occupation is grouped together with a car park attendant. The idea is that a car park attendant and a trolley collector are much more similar in terms of the skill that you require to do those, and more dissimilar to a motion picture projectionist and a chief executive officer. So I hope that gives you some sort of flavour of why we're asking for all this information as we try and think about how we can redesign ANZSCO and structure it to make it look like the 2023 labour market. So I'm now going to hand over to Joe, who's going to lead us through the question and answer session. Thanks, Joe.
Great. Thanks for that, Chris. Yeah, it's great to see so many questions already coming through. So there are some that are coming through that seem to be quite similar, so we might combine some of those. Also some questions where they might require a more complex response. We might leave those to provide a written response so they can be considered, rather than putting Chris and Jason too much under the spot
Thanks,
right
Joe.
now.
Also,
we may run out of time if we let Chris into too much of the detail. So yeah, we might start off with some questions that have broad appeal. So the first one, I'll read this out. What would the benefit of changing the codes be? Are there any practical benefits for service providers, or is it solely about data collection and making the process more streamlined and therefore more accurate data? So I might throw that to you, Jason, to start off with. But what are your thoughts?
I'm actually going to pass straight away to Chris. I think it's probably more in Chris's space, particularly around the codes. Chris, if you want to talk about, where and when we update and change codes.
Yeah, no problem. So ANZSCO is absolutely maintained by the Bureau of Statistics, but the classification is not just used to produce occupation data out of the ABS, like the census and the labour force. That's one of its major uses, but it's also used in lots of other places outside of the statistical environment. So some examples of where it impacts is it's one of the inputs into the construction of skilled migration policy. We have to work out what occupations go on the eligible list. So as I mentioned, we're talking about defining skill as our criteria for splitting out occupations. That's an input into the construction of that list that informs Australia's skilled migration policy. Another place where it's used is around trying to support apprenticeships and development of vocational education within Australia. Again, there are some lists of what occupations are being targeted for apprenticeship policy. So to give you an example, one of the changes we put through last year was we had an occupation that was called a plumber. So think the person that comes and fixes your pipes in your house. We split plumber into fire protection plumber and plumber excluding fire protection plumber. The reason we did that was that aligned closer to the policy and the qualifications and the intention of the apprenticeship program that's being run by the Australian government. So things like that are why we're trying to update it for both better statistics but also better policy outcomes for Australian society. So that's what we're hoping to see happen in there, improve the efficiency and the quality of the policy outcomes.
Great, thanks for that, Chris. Second question is one for you as well, Chris. Is it possible to comment in our submission if an occupation or occupations appear to be in inappropriate industry groupings? Is this something that can be changed?
Yep. So when we've grouped occupations together, we've grouped them on the basis of skill. So industry, strictly speaking, is not actually one of the dimensions we used. But I suspect what's behind the question is saying we've grouped them, the basis on which we've grouped them together. So again, if I think about my example of the pharmacist I talked about before, a suggestion might be, do we put pharmacists, who do we group them with? Do we group them with doctors and nurses, or do we group them together with other allied health workers like physiotherapists? That's a real world discussion that goes on. So the answer is yes. Please comment on that. Can I promise that will go through by the end of 2024? No, I cannot. But I can promise you that if I don't know about it, we're probably it's not going to appear on our radar. So if we've got that information base of people coming and saying, no, I don't think that's reasonable, and I think this is a better grouping, more than happy to hear that.
Great, thank you, Chris. Question number 3. Chris, I think this is another one for you. So you're popular with the people asking questions here. What about skill levels within an occupation? If one worker essentially does the same job as another, but with broader scope, drawing on more and more complex skills, are they the same occupation? For example, one operates with a diploma, the other with an advanced diploma or bachelor's degree, and another with a master's degree.
Yep, great question. So that's according to the textbook answer for ANZSCO, the definition of skill level assigned to an occupation is the skill level that you require to competently undertake that task's occupations. So that means if somebody has a university degree, but for example, they're driving a taxi cab, okay, you do not need a university degree to drive a taxi cab. The fact that the individual driving the taxi cab has a university degree doesn't suddenly make the taxi cab a skill level 1 or one that requires a bachelor's degree or above. The characteristics of the occupant are not relevant when deciding the skill level for the occupation. But I certainly think if you look at occupations and we've got an occupation that at the moment that we've assigned to a particular skill level, and we can distinguish that on the basis of the tasks that they do, then yes, they will be different occupations. So my textbook example of that is going to be the age and disability care worker, all 227,000 of them. I think most people would probably agree they're not all the same. There are going to be some at some higher level skill occupations to do different bits of age and disability care, particularly in the wake of the discussion of the Royal Commission. I suspect we probably need to reflect that in ANZSCO. And so the answer to that bit is yes. But I think that the key summary is it's not a characteristic of the individual, it's a characteristic of what's required to undertake those occupations tasks competently.
Thanks, Chris. Next question we have. What kind of supporting data evidence are you looking for from employers and industry, i.e. job description profiles or hiring statistics?
That me as well?
Yeah, go for it,
right.
Chris.
Okay. So the sort of information that we find really helpful is if we can find objective pieces of information that suggest this is what's going to happen into the future. So to give you an example, I'll give you a couple of examples. When we did the update in 2021, we updated and we put a group of occupations around aquaculture. So loosely fish farming, it's a bit more than fish farming, but that's the sort of idea. If we look at that now, it's actually not that significant. When we went back and looked at the previous census, we couldn't find a huge chunk of work around aquaculture. But the overwhelming evidence when we spoke to stakeholders and people sent us information back is that we expect that to be a really strong growth industry of Australia over the next 5 to 10 years. So that was the sort of compelling evidence we're after. So if it's publicly available and it's objective, that makes it much more compelling. If it's just someone says, oh, I think it's a strong growth industry, probably not what we're after. That's the sort of information that we're looking for.
Sounds great, Chris. Okay, moving on to we've got some great questions coming through, by the way, so thank you to everyone putting those questions in. Keep them coming. Next question. Are you feeding in to the current discussions on the updating of VET via the skills reform consultation?
That me as well, Jason?
You may, I know that you've been engaging with some of those areas, Chris, yeah.
Yep. Okay, yes. So, yes, we are one of our key partners in certainly the last 2 years has been our friends over at Department of Education, Skills and Employment, now renamed to Department of Employment and Workplace Relations. Yes, we continue to work with them. I was just talking with my counterpart there yesterday. Am I across all of the detail of what's happening in that reform? No, I'm not. So we are regularly meeting with them, trying to make sure that we can target our changes to occupation to better target what the intention of the apprenticeships policy is. And the example of the fire protection plumber I used is one of those. I suspect we will have lots more as we work through the rest of the classification.
Great, thank you, Chris. Next question. Will you be running engagement sessions targeted directly for industry stakeholders to help simplify the process for them to make a submission?
Yes. So we've gone and people have already contacted us, or we've gone and found some people from networks or relationships that we've formed historically, and we've done specific workshops with those. So we've already started on aged and disability care. We've held a couple of workshops with people from a couple of the major players there. The way we found those is by engaging with the relevant government department that's responsible for aged care. They've tapped into their stakeholder networks, and we've had a couple of great discussions with those. We don't know who some of these things are. We can only go and find out what we know. So if there's a strong stakeholder push out there and we don't know about it, if you send us a submission, absolutely, that way you get on our radar.
Yeah, exactly right, Chris. If I can add to that.
Please do.
Yeah, we've certainly done quite a bit of stakeholder analysis over the course of the last few months, trying to identify. But as Chris rightly pointed out, we haven't necessarily guaranteed we've got everyone. So if you're attending the webinar today and think, well, we haven't had anything, and we're a bit of an industry body that has certainly has a good view of the industry, then please by all means reach out to us. We'd love to engage with you on that.
Yeah, we want that to be exhaustive, but we'll do our best.
Great. Now, Jason, I think this is a question that you'll be able to take the lead on. Are you working with Home Affairs on the review of skilled migration processes?
Yeah, so obviously, Chris alluded to there's a number of different reviews going on at the moment, and that's obviously one of the important ones as well. So we are going to be working with Department of Home Affairs. In fact, I've just been in contact and trying to set up a meeting with them in the next week or two to really talk through what they're doing, what we're doing on the ANSCO side, and how those two pieces of work interact and overlap. And what I hope as well, we can develop some key messages to make sure that, if we're getting questions about the Home Affairs Migration System Review, or they're getting some questions around the ANSCO and how those two things, we're presenting that consistent message. So, yeah, absolutely working with those other departments.
Great, thanks, Jason. Good to hear from you in this Q&A session. Next question we have here. Obviously, within ANSCO, we have an NZ component of ANSCO. So the question here is New Zealand participating in this review?
So the answer to that is one of those really horrible yes or no questions. No, they're not officially participating due to other priorities for New Zealand government. They won't be reflecting the changes that we make in this review in the official statistics for New Zealand. Having said that, my understanding is that they're looking to review and to potentially input through submissions themselves as well. We're engaging quite closely with Statistics New Zealand as well. We'll continue to do so as that kind of progresses.
Great, thanks, Jace. Okay, let's have a look to see what else we have here. Okay, so we have quite a general question here. How long will the whole process take?
Again, another question with a few different parts to answer as well. So let me try and walk through a bit of the timeline to give you an understanding of what that looks like. We're doing a comprehensive review and update, and that is expected to deliver a new updated version or revised version of the classification by December 2024. So that's when you'll see a release of that official classification version on the ABS website. From there, it will take a little bit of time for those to flow through into official labour statistics for the ABS. At this stage, the plan is sometime after August 2026, you'll start to see that new version of ANZSCO being released through labour force statistics. And it will be adopted by the 2026 census. But of course, again, that will be a little bit of a lag there before you see data underpinned by that new version. That'll be around the last quarter of 2027, if my memory serves correctly. One of the things we're doing is trying to get a better understanding of what that might look like in other agencies and departments that also use ANZSCO. And so we're setting up a group to kind of work through those implementation aspects as well. But at this point, I wouldn't be able to comment on where those will be picked up in other data sources as well. The last thing to add to that is December 2024, that's when we're releasing that first that major update to the classification. If you're worried what happens if we don't get through everything by then, that is a risk. There's a lot to do, and we'll be absolutely doing our best to put through as many significant changes as we can fit in that time. If we can't, the intention is there, and we've got some funding to roll over into what we're calling an ongoing maintenance, because the last thing that we want is to fall back into this space where we're coming back and holding webinars again in 20 years' time about how we can update this out-of-date classification. So very much, and in fact, there's an information paper through our Updating ANZSCO page, if you want to have a look at that, around what our plans are for an ongoing maintenance strategy to ensure that ANZSCO continues to reflect the modern labour market.
Great, thanks, Jason. And that's obviously prompted another question here. I've heard there'll be a consultation on census content this year as well. Do I need to make a census submission as well as an ANZSCO one?
So no, the great news is no. As you would hope, we're working very closely with our other areas within the ABS. So we've provided a submission and it has some relevance for the consultation that Census are doing as well. Then we'll be passing that along on your behalf and talking that through with Census and vice versa. If you provide something through a Census consultation that has direct relevance to ANZSCO, they'll feed that information through to us as well. So consequently, you only have to put through one submission. So hopefully that reduces a bit of burden on people.
Great, thanks, Jason. Next question we have here. Can you engage with the South Australian Skills Commission to connect with industry stakeholders in SA?
Absolutely, yes, please. So we've got, the organisation has a number of officers that are outposted or in roles that partner with state and territory governments. And so we're working with what we call our strategic partnership managers as well. So I'd love to engage through those individuals as well. Please reach out if you're involved in the South Australian Skills Commission. Please reach out to us. We'd love to get in contact and see how we can help you facilitate some submission preparation as well, and engagement where you see changes are required. Absolutely.
Great, thanks for that, Jason. Let's see what else we have coming through on the Poll EV channel. So if you're sitting there with a desire to ask a question, feel free to pop it into Poll EV there, and you can hear straight from Chris and Jason. Okay, here's a good one. I previously provided a submission. Changes haven't been made. Should I bother this time?
Yeah, firstly, acknowledge that for those who have provided submission and we haven't been able to include those, I understand that the frustration that may have caused as well, and the difficulty then in being able to undertake your work, whether it's workforce strategy planning or wherever. we haven't been able to make the kinds of updates to the classification that we would have liked over this period of time. And so, that's why we're really excited that we've got the funding that we've got. We can do this comprehensive review and really bring the classification kind of into the modern labour market. What I would say is, if you've previously provided a submission, particularly in the recent period, as part of the last couple of targeted minor updates that we have done, then rest assured we've still got that on record. Even if we weren't able to implement or review your submission in those target updates, we've still got that, and we will be including that along with new submissions as well. If you're concerned or worried about or wondering whether or not we have got that, please reach out again through our email address there just to query that. I'm happy to engage in conversation on that. But yeah, if you've provided one in the recent few years, then we absolutely want to incorporate that. Please don't feel that you need to submit that again.
Great, thank you. And we've just had another question come through. When would we be able to see labour market projections updated with the new ANZSCO groups coming out of this update?
Me?
So yeah. I was just going to say, as I mentioned before, the plan at this stage is that the first time we'll start to see the updated ANZSCO coming through in labour force data would be in around August 2026. And that will take all of the updates from 21 and 22 minor updates, as well as the major updates in the 2024 version. The intention is that we will dual code to both bases, so the old version of the classification and the new updated version of the classification, so people will get a really good feel for what the changes are across the classification as well. The expectation is that we'll probably dual code, what we call dual code, for approximately 12 months before we roll just onto and produce labour force on just that one basis, the new updated version. So hopefully that answers your question there. Chris, did you want to add something there? Or?
Yeah, I was only going to add that's with the official statistics, and then when that goes through off to places like Jobs and Skills Australia, who are doing a lot of labour market projections and labour market analysis, and then ultimately into other government policy like the skilled migration list, like the apprenticeship schemes that we've talked about before, that will take some time. One of the pieces of work we've done with them is to try and understand what that process looks like, and we're having discussions with them to try and minimise the effort to migrate to the new classification, and therefore the speed with which that can be turned around for. But I guess my general comment will be, just because it's implemented in the classification doesn't necessarily mean it's automatically gone straight through the whole machinery of government and indeed outside government. So to give you another place where ANZSCO is used, is think about when you go and sign up for a superannuation policy, you're typically asked for your occupation in that. I think ANZSCO, or at least some historic version of ANZSCO, is being used in there. I guess we're having discussions with people to see, is that going to change? That's part of the implementation discussion that Jason alluded to before, and that will take time.
Thanks, Chris. And yeah, we've had a flurry of questions come in, so hopefully we can sneak all of these in before our time is up. For organisations who will potentially undertake to review a lot of occupations, is there an option to provide a submission via a mechanism other than the survey portal?
Yeah, absolutely. So the intention is that the Consultation Hub, the portal you just referenced, the intention is it provides an easy way for people to capture and to smooth that process. If for whatever reason that doesn't work for you, please reach out to us using the email address. We'd love to engage on how we can help facilitate the provision of your submissions. If it can't be through that process, which does enable us to streamline the kind of processing of it, then we want to work with you to provide that in any way that we can.
Great. And there's a link to a subsequent question. Will there be standardised templates or resources to help frame our submission? So, Jace, did you want to just touch on that any further from that previous response?
Yeah, so I would definitely encourage you to have a look at the submission guide. That does have the preview questions in it as well, so that you can have a look at the kinds of things that we'll be asking you to provide your responses to, and hopefully that helps to frame that. It also talks a little bit about the kinds of things that would help your submission, and Chris talked a little bit about that in one of his previous responses as well, with respect to evidence and supporting materials as well. So hopefully that answers the question there.
Great, thanks, Jason. And we have another question here that I might throw to you, Chris. Is ANZSCO likely to be restructured?
Yes, the degree to which it gets restructured for 2024 is currently being worked through. If we were to redo the totality of that, that we think is probably beyond the scope of what we can get done by 2024, and so we're working through what that timetable looks like. Do we think there'll be no changes to the structure of ANZSCO by the time we've done 2024? Clearly not. There will be changes to it. We're still trying to work out where that falls within what we can do by 2024. What will come after 2024 is when we'll have go into that maintenance process that Jason talked about to try and pick up the big structural changes that we don't put through by 2024. The sort of issues that we're thinking about is, at its most aggregated level, ANZSCO groups all of those 1,076 occupations into 8 major groups, ranging from managers and professionals down to labourers and machine operators. If we suddenly turn that 8 into, let's say, 10, for example, all of that time series coming out of labour force that is typically used, that's got to be backcast. That's a big deal to go and do that. So we're still working through how we might do that and the timeframes for doing that.
Thanks, Chris. And I think we might have time for one more question. So here's one that might be good for you, Jason, to have a go at responding to. What if you run out of time to review submissions?
So it is, I alluded to this at the start, and if anyone who's been thinking about the classification, it is a lot of work to get through. We've certainly ramped up our staffing profile to accommodate that, so we're anticipating that we can get through a lot in this next 2 years, and that's certainly what we're endeavouring to do. We're being very, very conscientious around our timeframes for delivery, and that's why I mentioned before that we do need to hold to those closing dates of the consultation periods to enable us to continue to progress along the journey of updating the classification. Where we have submissions that come in late, or we have such a volume of submissions that we can't possibly work that through, then we'll go through a process to prioritise the potential changes that need to be made, and we'll engage with stakeholders around those impacts to help us prioritise that as well. And any that can't be accommodated by December 2024 release will then flow through into the ongoing maintenance strategy, so that we'll be picked up in those ensuing years as well.
Thanks, Jason. And we can sneak in one more. Who do I contact if I have questions about the process?
Yeah, please reach out. We've got the updating ANZSCO at abs.gov.au. That's our mailing address. You'll see that on various pages on the website as well, and also on the final slide when we wrap up. Please reach out. Any questions about the process or how we can help, then please reach out on that email address, and one of our review team will get in contact with you.
That's a nice little segue, I think, for us to wrap up this Q&A session. So I might hand back to Chris now, just to close up the session for us.
Great. Thanks, Joe. So our last slide, key passage there is to say thank you for your time this morning. Thank you for your participation, and thank you for the submissions that you've given us and will be giving us. Reminder, that's the email address to get a hold of us. So we have people sitting behind that. So we've got a team of over 24 people that are working on this. So it's not Jason and me sitting in a dark corner trying to make this. It's well resourced, and we're doing our best to and be conscientious to listen and respond. So it's not going into a black box. key messages around there. Please send us your submissions. Other thing that would be helpful, gave us feedback on this session. It's the first time we've done this. We hope it was helpful for you, particularly if you think there was more information or more topics we could have covered. We're happy to do this for a future iteration. We'd love that feedback and that information. The other thing is, as you engage with material we've got on the Consultation Hub, we've done our best to try and put some supporting material up there to guide you through the submission process, like the guide that Jason referred to. If you've got suggestions, comments, criticisms, feedback on that material, love to hear that. We're trying to make this process as painless as we can for you. We acknowledge that going and writing submissions takes time. We're trying to make it low cost to our stakeholders. So again, thank you very much for your time this morning and your participation. We look forward to engaging with you into the future, and thank you very much for joining us.